Yeah, hi there. These comments, I'm going to use your initials J for privacy purposes, and you are one of my English 106 instructors here at California State University, San Bernardino, and you are working on putting together your first project. This is a compare and contrast type writing assignment, and you're trying to structure and figure things out, so you are ahead of the game, my friend. You've already come up with a first rough draft, and you want me to give you some comments on it, and that's exactly what I'm going to do right now. So let's take a look at your introduction. You say, before attempting Marius's writing method, writers should try any method in order to consider the organization and techniques in writing. Although I approach my writing assignments by rewriting and checking with other students, this writer sleeps on the paper and wakes up fixing his paper. In this essay, I will compare and contrast my method of writing and also Marius's method of writing, which are both very different, and of course they both give difference in results for the writer. The main topic when comparing these methods is to see which is easier, quicker, and of course more effective. So, according to your thesis, that your writing method is very different, right? But then in the next paragraph, you talk about a similarity. So we already have some logical problems in coherence. So what you state in the thesis, obviously it needs to connect with what happens in the body of the paragraph. And then when you say this, the main topic with comparing these methods is to see which is easier, quicker, and of course more effective for the writer. I don't think this is really your purpose. If you go to the syllabus here, it's saying your assignment is to write a short comparison and or contrast between your writing assignments and those proposed by Marius. That sums it up exactly. You're not really trying to explain which is better. Now, I know that in some compare and contrast type writing, you can also take it a step further, and you definitely can get into what's called evaluation, which means you compare two ideas, and then right after that you do some analysis of which one is better and why. But in this particular assignment, I'm not asking you to take that additional step. You see what I'm saying? So basically, are you more similar or different to what he is saying? So we need to do a little bit of work on your essay, right? Especially with the introduction. The introduction and the thesis is absolutely critical, I think, in terms of helping you write this kind of paper. So, pretty much what you've written so far, I would scrap just about all of it and start over with a more focused thesis around which you can frame the actual body of the essay, and you need a lot more specific detail, I think, in those body paragraphs in order to support what it is you're trying to say. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to give you some notes here for a minute, and let's go back here and we're going to work on your intro for a minute. So you have a very unclear thesis here. I will compare and contrast my method of writing and also Marius's method, which are both very different. Of course, they both give a difference in results for the writer. So this isn't going to help very much at all in terms of organizing your essay. But let's just say that you go through Marius's essay and you get down a list, and I think that there is a similarity here. I mean, you said it here even. You're saying the writer sleeps on the paper and wakes up fixing his paper. The fact that you say, although I approach my writing assignments by this writer, so this implies that this is a difference, right? So then up here we're going to say that the main difference that you have, according to your introduction, is reading the essay before going to sleep. It's what you do with that first draft when you're done with the first draft. But you also have a similarity when you write the first draft in the sense that you brainstorm like Marius does, right? So now we can rework your thesis a little bit because we can incorporate the difference and the similarity into the thesis. And then let's say we go to the second draft. And you say that, let's say that like Marius, you also make big changes in the second draft, or you're willing to make big changes or radical changes. And let's say in the third draft, that, like Marius, you also focus on sharpening sentences and choosing, and you like to choose the right word and so on. Okay, now what we have to do is take these ideas and then figure out how to write a thesis which incorporates these points. So, it might be logical with the... excuse me, I got a cold right now. But how about this? What if you mention the difference first and then you talk about the similarities after that, and then it makes it easy? So you might say, now think of Marius says this. If you go into the book on page, where is it? Page 91. He says, when you've said everything you say in this draft, print it out and then get up and go sit somewhere else without making any corrections. So you guys differ in what you do when you print this first draft, right? So let's say we differ in terms okay, so I think we have something here. Remember, writing the thesis is probably one of the most time-consuming aspects of this kind of paper because it really frames everything that's going to happen after that. So let's take a look at what we have so far. You say, although Marius and I differ in terms of what we do when we print the first draft, we're similar in our first draft, and that we both write outlines or brainstorm before writing the paper. Then you might say, in addition, we also similar because we make dramatic changes in our second drafts and we like to focus more on the sentence and word level of editing proofread our third drafts. This is it. So you see this, sometimes when you're creating a thesis, you cannot always, especially a compare and contrast type essay, you cannot always distill it into one sentence, so I didn't even try to do that. So let's see what we have. So you have, although Marius and I differ in terms of what we do when we print the first draft, we are similar in our first draft in that we both outline or brainstorm before writing the paper. In addition, we are also similar because we make dramatic changes in our second drafts, and we like to focus more on the sentence and word level of editing as we proofread our third drafts. You see what we're saying here? So here, if you notice, your thesis isn't very specific as to what's going to happen, and that ends up being in a non-specific kind of approach in your body paragraphs. But if you're very specific in the thesis, then it's much easier to create or frame those topic sentences in the body of the essay. So now what we have to do is we have to create an introduction now. And we just need some general ideas that can precede kind of what we're saying. So what you can do, think of it like an upside down triangle. Okay, so now we have a fairly sharply focused type thesis, which is essentially a compare and contrast type thesis to give the body of the essay a very clear, coherent organization. You can't just include this as the intro. You have to include maybe some general statements above that. So I'll just give you an idea of something that you can say here. Obviously, don't use exactly these same words in your paper, but let me just give you an idea of how you can begin the paper with some general statements. So this is something like this. You might say something like this: and to accomplish this goal, they will create some steps, processes to help them finish these assignments. Then you might say to aid these students in their writing projects, you'll say Richard Marius in his article writing drafts students should follow in order to successfully complete these essays. That's probably it. Then you just combine it together here. What have we done? We have some type of introduction here. So let's look at it one more time. So students attending universities will complete many assignments in their biology, chemistry, anthropology, and English classes. And to accomplish this goal, they will create some steps or processes to help them finish these assignments. To aid these students in their writing projects, Richard Marius, in his article Writing Drafts, outlines some steps that students should follow in order to successfully complete these essays. Then you say, although Marius and I differ in terms of what we do when we print the first draft, we're similar in our first draft in that we both outline or brainstorm before writing the paper. In addition, we're also similar because we both make dramatic changes in our second drafts, and we like to focus more on the sentence and word level of editing as we proofread our third drafts. So there it is. If you can do this, then it'll be very easy. Of course, this is the hard part. A lot of students say, hey, Michael, it's hard for me to do the introduction. It's hard for me to create my thesis. I'm like, hey, join the party. I don't think you're any different than anybody else. It takes a certain level of thinking, I think, before you can, because essentially what you're trying to do here, Jay, is you're really mapping out what's going to happen in the rest of the paper by creating the introduction. Okay, so now let's take a look at how we can create our topic sentences. So you can say, Marius and I are different. And how am I getting this idea? I'm taking it from the thesis. So this is your topic sentence here. This is important. Now you'll say, Marius and I are different after we print the first draft of our essay. So of course, you now have to spend basically about 50 words explaining what Marius does. After he prints the first draft, what does he say? He says, when you've said everything you can say in this draft, print it out. If you're working on it, get up from your desk and go sit in a chair somewhere else to read it without correcting anything. Then put it aside, preferably overnight. If possible, read your rough draft just before you go to bed. Many psychological tests have shown that our minds organize and create while we sleep if we pack them full before bedtime. Study a draft just before sleep and you may discover new ideas in the morning. So what I would do is take this idea in your own words, paraphrase it, re-explain it, and you want to re-explain it exactly right here. You'll say something like this. You'll see, for example, in his article, Marius suggests that blah, blah, blah. There's your 50 words. So once you say, for example, in his article, Marius suggests that, you want to re-explain what he says in his article in about 50 words, maybe 40, 50 words, and then here. So now here's what you have to do. So then you'll say something like this. Once you get into the middle of the paragraph, you'll say, on the other hand, when I completed my English 105 final project, I did not do what Marius suggested. Instead, then you can explain what you did when you printed your first draft out. That's it. So you only talk about what you did when you printed your first draft out and show how the process that you used after printing that first draft is different than the process that Marius proposes in his article. So here, right after you say, on the other hand, when I completed my English 105 final project, I did not, then you want to write approximately 40 to 50 words to explain that. Now, I noticed here, when you're writing your essay, you talk about things in a very general sense. I don't see any specific examples of any writing assignments that you discuss. I don't really see a lot of specifics as it relates to Marius's articles. So you're missing what's called the depth and the complexity of thought that I'm looking for in this kind of paper. So your goal here is right in the beginning, as you bring up your idea here, the English 105 final project, every time you discuss your writing process in this essay, stay focused on exactly the same writing assignment. Now, what effect do you think that's going to have on your writing? Does it make it more or less specific if in each paragraph you continue to discuss the same writing project? Do you think that adds or takes away from the depth and the complexity of thought of your writing? It's going to add to it, right? That's going to show that you can take an idea, you can develop it over several paragraphs, getting more and more specific as you go. That's a good thing, right? That's a good thing for writers. Okay, now let's talk about our next paragraph. So once you've talked about how you're different in terms of what you do when you print the first draft, you can now show a similarity. Maybe use a word like however. You might say, then you might say here, okay, here we go. So the next thing, so let's see what we're doing here. You'll say, however, Marius and I are similar in that we both use some type of informal outline before we start to write our papers. Notice how I'm starting with Marius each time. It's probably respectful because he's the expert to put his ideas in front of yours. So then we'll say, Marius and I are similar in that we both use some type of informal outline before we start to write our papers. For instance, to help writers get started, Marius recommends. So now you have to go into your book and you have to say, here's what he says about this idea. He says, find when the moment comes when you sit down to begin writing your first draft, it's always a good idea to start to list the points you want to cover. A list is not as elaborate as a formal outline. In writing your first list, don't bother to set items down in order of importance. List your main points, trust your mind to organize them. You'll probably make one list, study it, make another, perhaps make another. You can organize each list more completely than the last. And he continues to explain this idea in paragraphs 2, 3, and even 4. So what you're doing is, your job now is to take paragraphs, basically 1, 2, 3, and 4, and try to condense that information into about 40 to 50 words and explain it exactly after the word recommends. You see what we're saying? Now, here's the next thing. Once you get to your idea, you have to use some kind of word that shows how you're similar. So you'll say similarly, as I, you might say when I completed my English 105 final project, instead of not completed, but when I, you might say, started. You say similarly, when I started my English 105 final project, comma, and then blah, blah, blah. Now here you go again. Now you have, right after the word project, you have about 40 to 50 words explaining exactly how you started your English 105 final project, and show here how what you did is similar to what Marius suggests. So you remember, you've already explained what Marius says in the beginning of this paragraph. Now you're going to show how what you did is similar to that again, about maybe 40 or 50 words. So that way each of your paragraphs are fully developed, and you're balancing your comparison by in each paragraph spending about half the time you're talking about what Marius suggests, and then half the time in the paragraph you're talking about what you do, and how what you do is either different or similar to what he suggests. Now notice here, we might say here, in addition, because we're adding to the previous paragraph, am I right? So it's logical, if you want to add to something which isn't different from what you just said, you can use a word like in addition or furthermore. You might say Marius and we have to go back to the syllabus. We're basically just restating what we're saying. In addition, we are similar because we both make dramatic changes in our second draft. So Marius and I both follow a similar approach. Because we are willing to make big changes. To illustrate, Marius advises that writers, notice how I'm not using the word you in here. If you go to what you were doing in many parts of your essay, you're using a lot of the you in there. For example, both of these methods are very effective toward writing, and of course, the very first step, when you say you, and I would change this to say when a writer has to know what to apply in a passage. But here, he or she will also have to look at which is quicker, easier, and of course more effective. You see what I'm saying? You don't have to use the you here. Your purpose is different than Marius's purpose. Marius uses the you point of view because he's instructing his audience on how to do something. But the purpose is flipped when it comes to you. You're no longer doing that. You're more examining and explaining and comparing the two processes. So you're moving from the instructional mode of writing to the more explaining mode of writing, which requires a different point of view. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so let's go back to what we're doing here. So we have, in addition, Marius and I both follow a similar approach in our second drafts because we're willing to make big changes. To illustrate, Marius advises that writers. So what you have to do is now, your job is to go to page 92 and look at paragraph 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You have to look at those paragraphs and condense those points in about 40 words, 40 to 50 words. So you're going to explain them exactly after the word writers. Again, in a similar manner to Marius, notice how we're still focused on this final project. We're developing this idea over these different paragraphs. We're taking exactly the same idea here, the final project, discussing what you did in your final project when you printed the first draft, and then what did you do in the final project to get started on it? What was your procedures there? And then what did you do in your final project when you completed the second draft there? You see what I'm saying here? So now, once it says, in a similar manner to Marius, when I completed the second draft of my English 105 writing project here, now you have to write about 40 to 50 words to explain this. And only focus. As you explain your final project, you're simply focusing on the changes, the big changes that you had to make. The more specific you are in the change you made, the higher your grade's going to be. Right? Because that's going to show that you have a lot of depth and a lot of thought to the writing. So now we can move on to our final paragraph. So now we see where we are. Now we're talking about what we do in our third drafts. So here, you might use a word like finally, because this brings you to your last point. Marius and I share or how about this? Marius and I both focus more on, what do you have up here? The sentence and word level of editing in our third drafts. You'll say Marius Here we go again. Now, does it surprise you as we bring up this next idea? It says Marius and I both focus on sentence and word level editing, so your responsibility now is to go to page 92 to look at paragraph 11 and 12 and talk about what he says or what he likes to do in his third draft. So you want to, again, maybe in about 40 or 50 words, explain what he says in paragraphs 11 and 12. So that's what you want to do. Then, once you get to what you want to say, you can say likewise, does it surprise you that I'm still talking about the same writing project, the English 105 final project? So I also completed the third draft in my English 105 final project and here. So what are you going to do? You're now going to take about 40 to 50 words and explain what you did when you completed your English 105 final project, the kinds of sentence and word changes you made as you worked on your final project. And then, excuse me, then you can use what's called in conclusion. Alright, so now let's take a look at what we have here. So if you go back to the actual assignment, to really explicitly create a compare and contrast organization, okay, so let's take a look at the whole thing one more time. So first of all, in the introduction, let's identify what we've done. It says students attending universities will complete many assignments in their biology, chemistry, anthropology, and English classes. And to accomplish this goal, they will create some steps or processes to help them finish these assignments. To aid these students in their writing projects, Richard Marius in his article, Writing Drafts, outlines some steps that writers should follow in order to successfully complete these essays. Let me go ahead and put this in italics because this is an article. So we have, although Marius and I differ in terms of what we do when we print the first draft, we're similar in our first draft in that we both outline or brainstorm before beginning the paper. In addition, we are also similar because we both make dramatic changes in our second drafts, and we like to focus more on the sentence and word level of editing as we proofread our third drafts. And therein lies our thesis. So let's identify that. Maybe make it red. Now, once we have that, it's very easy now to create our topic sentences. Our topic sentences are basically, it's a restatement of what we said in the thesis. It is possible to use repetition and rephrase as a way of coherently connecting ideas together. Remember, compare and contrast is very structured. It makes it very easy for the reader to understand the ideas. As long as you're logical and follow some recognizable organization. Let's take a look at the next one. You kind of see how it works? So we put it like that. Now the next thing. The other trick is you now have to introduce each writer, and it's helpful to use some type of transition word and try to avoid using exactly the same transition word each time. So to introduce Marius, in my second paragraph, I'm using a word like, for example. We'll just make it blue. Now, once I move from discussing Marius to discussing my process, I do, in this case, use on the other hand, because we are different in terms of what we do after we print the first draft. So it makes sense logically to use a word like on the other hand. You could have said conversely, in contrast, or whatever. As long as it shows an opposite type idea, you're good. Now, in the next paragraph, once we introduce Marius's ideas here, instead of the word for example, we're using for instance, which does the same thing. It introduces a more specific idea. Now, here's a key. Once we go from discussing Marius, and then we discuss my writing project or my final project here, you use the word similarly, because the two processes are similar here, so you should use a transition word to show that relationship. Now, it's also interesting here is I chose to use the beginning. In the beginning of this paragraph, I used the overall word however, because I'm no longer talking about a difference. I'm now talking about some similarities. That's why I use the word however, to show that paragraph 3 is different from the information that the reader has just read in paragraph 2. Of course, when I get to this paragraph, I'm using the word in addition because I'm talking about another similarity, not a difference. So I'm adding to paragraph 3 when I get to 4. So in addition, Marius and I both follow a similar approach in that blah, blah, blah. Now remember here, to introduce Marius, I use for example here, I use for instance here. Now I'm going to use a word to illustrate. You see that? I'm just showing here by using to illustrate, and you're showing that you have a repertoire of words that you can use to show how ideas are connected, and you're not just stuck on using one word all the time. And that shows good word choice. Shows you have some experience with writing and so on. Now, in this case, to show how my ideas in my 105 project are similar to Marius's ideas, if you take a look at this, we say in a similar manner to Marius, right? And that shows that we are similar. So we use this. This is actually a prepositional phrase, and it shows how the ideas are logically connected. Now in this case, I use the word finally. And again, we can make this our topic sentence here. So make it red. And then when we introduce Marius's idea here, we'll say, in fact. In fact, you can use to introduce a smaller point and also to emphasize that point. You can also say something like indeed. But again, I'm trying to show I have a variety of words that I'm using in my different paragraphs. I'm not just using the same words all the time. So then you explain Marius's ideas, and then to show that your project in your third draft that you completed or whatever, you're showing how that's similar, and that's why I chose to use the word here likewise. Again, do you know that we can use these kinds of words? So what you can do is you can go to Google and you can just put what are some compare and contrast transition words I can use in writing. And of course, Google's going to find information for you. And then we have our conclusion here. So essentially, this is how you can create a really tightly organized compare and contrast essay. Now, the other important thing is, notice how every single time here, I'm explaining the example. Let's make this one, let's say, orange. So I'm taking this English 105 final project, and I'm mentioning just that one idea in all my body paragraphs, and I'm developing it for different purposes. This also helped you score high in my writing class because you're showing that you have a lot of depth and a lot of thought to your ideas. You're not just talking about things generally like what you did in your draft. You're getting much more specific than that. You see what we're saying here? So in a nutshell, here it is. So again, this is a live demo of how you can complete a compare and contrast essay. Now there are different ways of doing this. I chose to use what's called sequencing or point-by-point organization, which means in each body paragraph I talked about Marius and my process together in the same paragraph. Now of course, if you want, you can divide and put Marius's ideas in one paragraph and yours in another. This is what's called chunking or blocking. You can do either one. My opinion is I think it's a little easier for the reader to see the points together in the same paragraph. But remember, it's more logical. Instead of Marius does this, I do this, he does this, I do this. My recommendation is to spend in each of these paragraphs the first 40 or 50 words discussing Marius first, and then after that the next 40 or 50 words discussing what you do in your final project. And that's going to give you a very tight organization. All right, anyway, thank you very much for your questions, and I look forward to reading your paper.